From a humanoid figure to small town horrors, bug problems, and a twisted hotel, tonight's video has some pretty wild and bizarre stories. A huge thank you to the writers. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, likes and comments are always appreciated. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Also, the last story is a tad dark, so for this video I am going to be issuing a trigger warning. I know the majority of you don't mind, but I feel that it's necessary anyway. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. This started a few weeks ago, and I'm honestly scared and wondering if anyone else has experienced the same. The first time I noticed something, I was in a public place, a restaurant to be exact. It is a semi-expensive place where the waiters and waitresses wear white button-down shirts and black slacks instead of polo shirts and aprons. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and my father, my girlfriend, and myself were well into eating our food. The restaurant was kept dark, and we were in a booth. But from the corner of my eye, I spotted something down the rows of empty booths and tables. It looked like a waiter. At least the clothes looked similar to one, but with very long dark hair. Whomever it was quickly crawling on the floor. It was fast, but it looked exactly like someone on their hands, ass tilted up, crawling on all fours. I assumed that a waiter had maybe dropped something and was looking for it, and I laughed it off and mentioned it to my father. He stood up out of curiosity and looked over the booth behind him. No one was there. No one other than two women in dresses were even on that side of the restaurant. After he informed me of this, I checked as well. If it were a waiter, they would have had to crawl or walk by our booth to go anywhere, and no one had passed since I spotted them. We continued eating, and I forgot all about it. 2 days later I spotted it again, and this time I know I saw it. For a fact, 100% without a doubt, I saw the crawler. I still have a mark on my back to remind me of it. I do telework and work nights. My job consists of answering after-hour calls, and some local doctor's offices, taking messages, putting important calls through to the after-hours doctors, and recommending patients call 911 if they call with real emergencies. We handle a total of 16 different offices in the area, but we aren't exactly busy. 3 to 4 of us work in a small ground floor office during the night. My cubicle and terminal face a large window that looks out to the parking lot on the east side of the building. Every Monday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, from 9:30 p.m. until 8 a.m., I sit at my desk and answer the occasional blinking light. It was a Thursday night, and I hadn't taken a phone call for the 3 hours I had been there. As I leaned back in my office chair, playing a game on my phone, I saw it. Illuminated by a light pole that sat on a little concrete island just out of sight, on the right side of the large office window, a figure rapidly crossed in front of the window. It moved fast, and I saw the shape of it from the top of my vision as I played my game. I lowered my phone and looked ahead into the darkness outside the glass, and it, yes, it, crossed once more. It looked human mostly. The hair was very long and unkempt, and what I had originally thought was a white shirt was actually tattered cloth that looked like it was once a shirt or the top of a dress, discolored but still light. Its head was turned unnaturally to the side as it skittered across, staring in with a blank look. The eyes were sunken, along with the cheeks. The mouth hung open and crooked, like what I would expect from a corpse. I couldn't make out teeth, couldn't see pants, but the back end of it was caked in filth. The back legs were skinny and malformed, possibly from walking on all fours, with its dirty rear end arched up to the sky. I screamed when I noticed the face staring in, and fell backwards in my chair, and hard. My coworkers came over to see if I was okay, and I immediately told one, a large gentleman, to go lock the doors that led out, and told the other two, a bearded guy we called Finky, and an older woman that we never really talked to go look out the window. No one saw a thing. No shapes, shadows, nor lights. No sounds came from outside, and nothing shook the doors. Only I had saw the thing. I asked Finky, who was my supervisor, if I could go home early. Seeing that they thought I was crazy, even though I knew well enough to not describe what I saw to them. I made up a story about being through some stressful things in my home life and not sleeping well. In truth, everything had been fine up until this, and sleep was never an issue before. The story worked, and Finky gladly sent me home for the night. I walked to my car with my key positioned between my fingers. Should I have had to punch whatever that thing was? I wanted whatever advantage I could get. Doing a slow, nervous run. If you have ever been put in a position like this, you know the run I'm talking about. I made my way to my Subaru Impreza and jumped in, immediately locking the doors. Instead of driving off immediately, I sat in my car with the engine running, scanning the parking lots. There was some concern from my coworkers, and honestly, I was fully mentally prepared to run down whatever in the hell this thing is. When I realized it wasn't anywhere to be seen, I drove through the parking lot, around the office buildings and few cars that sat in the lots, looking for a sign of it. It was nowhere to be seen. I live a 25-minute drive from work, a 25-minute dark drive through empty streets. During my drive, I thought I saw it twice in 2 separate alleyways, but this could have been my overactive and stressed imagination. The possible sightings did nothing to calm my nerves, but I made it home safely. My house is small, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, single-story house with siding and a single-car garage. I never park in the garage because I use it for my drums and exercise equipment. This night I had wished it was empty, if only to provide safety for me when I got out of my car. Sadly, the only option was parking on the street. I parked and got my nerve up, opened my door, and ran to the front door of my house. Unlocking my door, which usually took a second, took almost 30 seconds because I was shaking so bad. Funny how fright ends up breeding more frightful situations. In an ideal world, we would keep our cool and act smartly, but that is rarely the case. Once I was in, I hit the alarm on my white all-wheel drive Chariot and locked my front door. I turned on every light in the house and did a thorough check. By now I had realized that whatever it was had probably followed me. That Chance wasn't to blame me for seeing it at a restaurant and then at work. Most people never see something like this, yet I saw it twice. I deeply wished and prayed I would never see it again. Grabbing my baseball bat and a knife from my kitchen, I posted myself in a watch position on my couch and silently sat watching the front door and the windows, with the blinds closed. Even if it was out there, I didn't want to see it. An hour or 12 passed as I stayed in this position. Time ceased to exist, and I nervously waited for it to burst through my window or door and come running at me like a happy dog. Then my car alarm went off. I sat in my bright fortress, and at first thought it was an electronic beeping from one of my tablets, partially because I was so focused on sight that I had to put my ears in a standby state, partially because I had never heard my own car alarm before. It took me much longer than it should to figure it out, but I eventually did, and every chill possible hit me. Pulling my keys out of my pocket, I started hitting buttons to shut it off, and one did the trick. I now knew something was out there. Thoughts of it crawling out of my trunk once it knew it was safe started to creep up, wondering if the clearance on my car provided enough room for it to hold on where asked. Most importantly, I began to ask just how fast the damn thing could move, if it was so inclined. Thoughts and minutes passed in unison, and the alarm went off again. I didn't look out. I wasn't going to look out. What I did was call the police and tell them that a woman, my best guess at that point, was outside fiddling with my car. Realizing that time could be of the essence, I added that she was banging on my door at that point, and maybe had a weapon. Yes, I lied through my teeth, but I would like to see anyone explain to the emergency operator that they saw a crawling humanoid that was following them. Even better, I would like to see the kind of police response time you'd get when you told that story. The police were quick, but I won't waste time with a play-by-play of nothing. No one was out there. They hadn't seen her galloping down the road. Galloping will be used again. There were no dents or prints or dead-eye glints. Nothing. So they did what they could do and left me a card and advice to lock my doors. Sleep didn't come that night, and it wasn't until about 11 a.m. that I even laid down, on my couch, with my knife and baseball bat within reach. My work hours were probably to blame for a small part of my lack of tiredness. but I rest a majority of it on the face. I called out of work, not feeling well, when I woke up at 6 p.m. The opportunity of being at home without any obligations was fully wasted for most of the evening. I didn't even text my girlfriend. To be honest, I probably forgot I had a girlfriend, a father, my middle name. It was just nerves driving my every little movement. I pissed a few times, reluctantly, and sat on my couch waiting for horrors on scene. The night passed and relief came. My car never screamed from a disturbance. No other noises than a clock ticking and an occasional car passing. I started to believe I was safe. The next couple of nights I went to work, had my cubicle changed to one not facing the window, and everything was normal. My first day off came, and I spent it with my girlfriend. I told her everything. I told her everything that had happened, and she seemed concerned. Did research on her phone, which brought back more questions than answers, and slept over. It wasn't until the next day that everything went sour. I had agreed, weeks in advance, to cover one of my coworkers' shifts on this particular Wednesday. The first half. The trade-off was they would cover the first half of my Friday shift. The guy worked 2 jobs and was picking up someone from the airport and wanted to go out to dinner, and being me without any real life on weekdays, I accepted. The shift went fine, and I got off at about 12:45 when he came in. After saying my goodbyes, I left. Nothing was waiting in the parking lot for me, and I wasn't overly concerned anything was. I turned on Bluetooth, began playing my music, and started to drive home. The street that leads to the office buildings is somewhat long, and dead ends at them. Streetlights sprout up along the 2-lane streets. Cars don't come down unless they are going to the offices, and only our office has employees at it at night. The street is a dark, lifeless thing once work lets out. Tonight, it wasn't so lifeless. As I turned on the street, I saw something next to a tree on an island at the corner. At first, I thought it was a bicycle. Thinking about it, a bicycle somewhat fits the strange shape of this gaunt figure. Obviously, it wasn't a bicycle. I knew this once I saw it move. Once I saw it had long hair and a face with a slack jaw, and then it began galloping. I passed it as the sprint began. To say I was freaking out would be an understatement at best. Watching in my side view mirror, I could see it was keeping pace, on the shoulder of the street, just behind me, disappearing in the darkness of the first few street lamps. I gunned it once my brain acknowledged I was in a car. Okay, Google. I kept screaming to tell my phone to call anyone at all, but my panicked voice was blending the words too much for it to recognize I was speaking to the damn thing. I made the mistake of taking my eye off the side mirror to grab my phone, and with phone in hand I looked back. The creature, head cocked like when I saw it in the window, was next to the back driver's side door. I swear I was doing about 60 miles per hour at that point, but I wasn't looking at my speed. It kept hopping and breaking pace to try to grab onto my car, only to miss, or on one occasion rapidly tap the dark outline of a hand on my fender, and would have to catch itself and gallop faster once more. The road was coming to the intersection, and I was more scared than I had ever been. The road dead ends at the intersection, and I would have to turn either right or left. Left to go home, or right to go towards the desolate industrial area farther outside. Either way I would have to slow down, but would have to slow much farther, and cross right in front of its path to turn left. So right towards absolutely no help it was. I ran the red light and skidded around the corner. I only let off the gas long enough to make it, and immediately pushed all the way down once my car was facing the right way. Still I slowed and watched the top of its head bob up right next to my window, and it kept running straight without the time to correct its course. I watched it run out in the field across from the road, and disappear. Sure, it would return behind me on the road shortly. I didn't slow, but I did look down and dial my dad. He picked up after too many rings, and I frantically began telling him what was going on. He offered to stay on the phone with me, but told me what I already knew. I was heading towards absolutely nothing, and whatever this was would find me helpless out there. I had to turn around. Once I had enough distance, hoping that it either gave up or was finding a shortcut to cut me off well ahead, I turned around and started to drive back towards civilization. As I passed the intersection of my work, I began having a panic attack. My father told me to get a hold of myself and drive to his house instead. He had a gun, and I could sleep there for the night. an offer I eagerly accepted. So to his house I drove, and I realized very late in the drive something I feel no shame in admitting. At some point during the chase, I had pissed myself. A grown man, a 6'1" man, that worked out and had fights he won in high school. A man that drank beer and talked shit with the best of them. A guy whose dad would take him hunting when he was a kid. That camped in dark forests with nothing but a knife and compass. I, a guy who always considered himself pretty tough like his old man, thoroughly pissed through his own clothes. Never will I find myself though. I have met my match 1,000 times over. My dad is tough as nails, and when my mom was killed by a drunk driver 10 years prior, he snapped into kick-ass mode and took care of everything without a tear. If he did cry for the woman that I knew he loved more than himself, it was never in front of me or my younger sister. He worked for 30 years doing manual labor, and preferred whichever way possible to strain the shit out of his body. His arms are the diameter of most men's heads. He is tough as nails. Hell, nails would bend just looking at him, even though he is pushing 60. But it was an 1.5-hour drive to get to his safety. Once again I thought I saw the creature a few times during my drive, but nothing gave chase, and after some silent, nervous driving, I found myself pulling up to his house. He was waiting outside in a t-shirt, dickies, and boots, holding his shotgun. He waved for me to wait in my car and began searching my vehicle. He even had me pop the trunk. After determining it was safe, he had me come in and told me to go up to the second story where my childhood room was. He had extra pants waiting for me on the bed. I had told him of my accident while on the phone during the entire drive. And I changed. Then I passed out from emotional exhaustion. The next morning I woke up at 7 a.m. and went downstairs. My dad was awake sitting in his living room. He hadn't slept. He kept watch in a much calmer and organized way than I had. As soon as I walked over to him, he looked at me, tired but alert, and said something that put me right back into a state of fear. Your mom saw it too. He proceeded to tell me that my mother had mentioned seeing a woman crawling around one night when I was little, maybe 5. We were at a park and it was getting late, and I was being fussy while walking with her. Something like me being tired from running and wanting her to carry me. And when she picked me up, she saw what she thought was a naked woman crawling on the other side of the park. She quickly walked me back to the car and left. She has never mentioned seeing it again, but my dad remembered this conversation because she wanted him to call the police, and he had, in case some kid got hurt or abducted by a crazy person. So, my dad and I hung out and rechecked the car. We went back to my house and checked it. He bought a camera for my car and a camera for my house. He was concerned. My girlfriend was concerned as well. Both offered to stay at my house with me, and I picked her. And for over 2 weeks, nothing happened. Unlike last time, I didn't calm down. Every day I kept watch. Driving was terrifying, even during the day. Everything was a chore and a lesson in fear, and I started to believe that my girlfriend thought I was crazy. 2 days ago that changed, and she recommended that I do more research, which brought me here. 2 days ago, technically 2 nights ago, we had come back from Walmart and we forgot to lock the car. It is a new habit, and we slip occasionally. She had left a bag with her drink in it in the car, and we didn't notice until we sat down to watch Netflix. About halfway through an episode of that 70s show, she stood up and walked towards the door. Forgot my soda in the car, was all she said. She wasn't afraid of it because she hadn't seen it, and nonchalantly opened the front door and walked out. I heard the loudest scream I had ever heard, and jumped up and ran towards the door, meeting her as she ran hysterically. She pointed out the open door at my car, and I peered out. The back door of my car was wide open, and the interior light was on. The interior light that lit up the slack-jawed, gaunt face of the creature sitting in the back seat. Its neck and face were stretched forward between the front bucket seats like an eager passenger having a conversation with an absent driver. My heart sank to my groin, and I slammed the door shut and told my girlfriend to call 911. By the time the police arrived, she had told them too much, and I'm sure they thought we were crazy or playing a prank. The creature had left. The back door of my car sat wide open, and the police suggested that a friend or some teen was playing a prank on us. My girlfriend cried through the whole process. She believes me now, and after the police left, recommended that I put feelers out regarding this before asking me to drive her back to her place. My girlfriend made it clear that she will not be staying over with me anymore, and that while she loves me, she doesn't want me to stay with her during the night. I don't blame her. For now, I am staying with my dad, but I still have to work and I am still very afraid of whatever this is. Surely I have not seen the last of it, and hopefully it goes away, or one of us kills the damn thing. Andy, come here and help me load up the rest of these boxes. I heard my father shout over the roaring engine of the moving van. I walked over to my bedroom window and looked down to see my father struggling to carry the boxes to the van. I'm coming, Dad. I'm coming, Dad. I just need to finish packing some of my clothes. I shouted down to him, startling him and almost making him drop one of the boxes. You see, my parents are currently going through a divorce, and as a result of that, my father and I decided to move out of the big city and move to a small town called Rockford. I had never heard of this town, and neither had my father, but as he wanted to get away from everything, a town in the middle of nowhere that no one had heard of seemed to be a good place to go. I finished tossing the remaining clothes on my bed into any boxes that still had room left. Once I was finished, I grabbed the boxes of my clothes, said goodbye to my room, and headed down the stairs to the moving van. Here, let me give you a hand with that, my dad said, running over and taking the box from me. Thanks, Dad. Sorry about making you jump, I said while trying to hold back a smile. He just shook his head at me and took the boxes to the van. After a couple more hours of loading boxes, my dad and I handed off the keys to the new owners and started the 12-hour drive to our new home. The car journey was long and boring. My dad spent most of it telling me how great this move is for us, and that I'll make lots of new friends in school. Honestly, I didn't really have a lot of friends at my current school as it was, so I was looking forward to being able to start over, and I know my dad was looking forward to the same thing. After what felt like days, we started driving up a rocky side road. Dad, are you sure we're going the right way? This road doesn't look like it leads to a town, I said while looking around. The dirt road went right through the center of the forest. The trees formed a canopy like a tunnel over the road, making the already dark forest even darker. The only light was the dim light from the van headlights, and the occasional reflection from the eyes of the forest. After 20 minutes went by, I turned to my dad and said, "Are we lost? I haven't seen any signs or anything to show people live around here." My dad looked exhausted as he replied, "Honestly, I have no idea where we are. I was told to take the dirt path off Route 32, and it would lead to the town." He rubbed his forehead. I could see the sweat dripping from his face. The only thing I can think to do right now is to keep following this road and hope it leads somewhere. Otherwise we may have to spend tonight in the moving van. He gave me a small grin and turned the radio up. "Dad, is it just me or do you smell smoke?" I asked while covering my nose. The smell reminded me of a time when I was younger, and my parents and I had a large bonfire on the 4th of July. It's one of my favorite memories from when I was a kid. I remember it mostly because my parents didn't argue the whole time we were there. "I think there's something wrong with the van. I'll pull it over so we can take a look." My dad pulled into a less dense part of the forest and got out to check the van. "Andy, get out here and give me a hand." "So, Dad, what's the problem?" I said as I unbuckled my seatbelt and hopped out of the van. As the outside air hit my skin, a deep chill ran through me, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. My dad had popped the hood and was messing around with the engine. "So, what's the problem?" "Honestly, Andy, I have no idea. It might be a spark plug issue, but that's as far as my motor skills go." He shut the hood, turned, and sat on the bumper. "Alright, we have two options. We can either follow this road on foot until we find someone to help, or we sleep in the van and have another look in the morning." I sat down next to him on the bumper. It's late, and I don't know about you, but I don't want to just go wandering through the forest in the dark. It's kind of how most horror movies start. He gave me a smile, and we decided to sleep in the van tonight and figure something out tomorrow morning. Between my dad's snoring and the strange noises coming from the forest, I hardly slept at all that night. "Knock, knock, excuse me, can you please move your van?" I bolted upright. My eyes were heavy from lack of sleep, and it took me a minute for my eyes to focus. There was a man standing at the window. He had bloodshot eyes and a messy beard, which reached down to his stomach. I turned to face my dad. He was still fast asleep, so I gave him a nudge. "Dad, wake up. We have company." He stirred for a second, stretched his back, then turned to face me. He looked as surprised as I felt, seeing the man at the window. My father and I opened the van doors and clambered out. Then we both froze. We were in a town. My eyes started darting around, trying to understand what was happening. Our van was in the center of what looked like a town market. There were about 20 to 30 people all stood around, staring at us. The town looked a little run down, but other than that, it looked normal. I had no idea how we missed this last night, and why we didn't see any lights on. My dad walked up to the man that awoke me. "Excuse me, sir, do you know where we are?" The man smiled, showing his black and rotten teeth. "You're in the town of Rockford. Are you passing through, or are you two staying for a while?" My dad held out a hand to the man. "Sorry, I haven't introduced myself. My name's Jonathan, but you can call me John, and this is my son Andy." I stood there awkwardly watching as the rest of the people in the market went back to walking around and shopping. "Oh, so you're the new people moving into our town. We were expecting you last night, and my name's Kevin. It's nice to meet you." The man replied as he reached out and shook my father's hand. My father quivered and pulled back his hand. "Geez, your hand is freezing." My father took a step backwards. "Wait, so if this is Rockford, could you show us to our house, although our van is broken?" "Sorry about that. My wife usually complains about my cold hands as well. Well, you and your son were asleep. I took a look at the van. It should be working fine now," Kevin said as he walked over to one of the men who has been staring at us since we got out of the van. My dad got back in the van, and after a couple of seconds, the engine roared to life. My dad started whooping and clapping his hands. "Alright, Andy, get in the van. We need to get moving." As I hopped back in the van, Kevin came back over and pointed us in the direction to our new home. Now, I won't bore you with details of my father and I traveling to our home and unpacking, so we will continue this story from the first morning after we moved into our new home. The sunlight was blinding as it shone through the gaps in my curtains, causing me to stir from sleep. As my eyes adjusted to the bright sunlight, I laid there staring up at a ceiling that I wasn't familiar with. Yesterday was a very strange day. Thinking back, I think the only person we spoke to was Kevin. There were other people around, but not a single one said hello. They just stared at us and kept walking. "Andy, get your lazy ass out of bed." I heard my father shout from downstairs. "I'm coming, Dad." I shouted back at him while dragging myself out of bed. As I headed downstairs and walked into the kitchen, I saw my dad trying to cook bacon. My mother was the cook in the family. "So, Andy, what are you planning on doing today? As unfortunately, I need to try to set up our internet so I can start working from home," he said before handing me some undercooked sausages and some almost black bacon. "Thanks, Dad. Looks very edible." I gave him a smile. "I think I'll just have a wander around the town if that's alright." I reached past my breakfast for the only piece of toast that wasn't burnt. After breakfast, my dad disappeared into the study so he could set up his desk. I grabbed my coat and went for a walk around town. It was strange. It was around 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, and there was no one around. I walked for about 15 minutes and every shop I went past was closed. In fact, all the stores looked abandoned and run down. The town was as silent as the grave. There were no cars. I didn't even see a bird in the sky. As I was walking down a long pathway near the marketplace I was in yesterday, the skin on the back of my neck stood on end. "Now, Andy, what are you doing here?" I jumped and turned around. It was Kevin. He was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. In fact, he looked exactly the same as he did yesterday. "Morning, Kevin. Do you know where everyone is?" But as the words left my mouth, I could hear people. I spun around so fast that I almost fell backwards. People. The market was full of people. There were kids running around, and market traders shouting about their goods. Buy one, get one free in rib joints. Buy 10 apples for the price of 5. The smells were incredible. Fresh fruit, the smell of the fresh meat from the butcher, and apple pies. There were more apple pies than I could count. "Kevin, this place was empty a second ago. Where did they all come from?" Kevin took a step backwards, smiled and replied, "Are you feeling alright, Andy? This place has been packed for the past couple of hours. The market here usually starts around 7 a.m. I was completely confused. I remember walking through an empty market, and it was completely silent. I scratched my head in confusion, and when I turned to look at the people again, for the briefest of moments, It felt like they were all staring at me. Then once I was facing them again, they carried on with their routine. Something was definitely odd about this town. I chalked up the weird behavior as normal for a small town, and tried to forget about it, and carried on with my walk. I ran into a couple more people while walking around some of the back streets, and they all gave me smiles but didn't say anything. I even said hello to some of the people I saw. They did the same thing, gave me a smile, and carried on their way. I was walking behind one of the shops when I saw Kevin leaning against a wall having a cigarette. I started walking towards him, but before I got close, he dropped his cigarette and fell through the wall he was leaning against. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the section of the wall he fell through, trying to understand what I just saw. I took a deep breath and decided to head back home. Nothing eventful happened on my walk home, and once I was back, I spent the rest of the day in my room. The next morning, I decided to head down to the market to try and find Kevin. I was hoping he could explain what I saw yesterday. As I turned the corner to the market, I was completely confused just like yesterday. It was empty and completely silent. I could hear my heart getting faster, and the world started spinning. "We meet again, Andy. You don't look so good. Maybe you should head home." I turned around to see Kevin was standing there, and like last time, he looked the same as he did yesterday. His clothes were still the same. Then I heard it, the sound of a busy market. The people were back, and that's when I noticed. The people in the market were acting the same as they did yesterday. Now, I don't mean the same people were there. It was like every step they took, every person they spoke to, and everything they brought was the same as yesterday. "Andy, are you feeling alright?" Kevin took a step towards me. He had a cynical smile on his face. "Andy, I want you to know how excited we all are about you and your dad moving here. It's nice to have people here for a change." As he turned around and started walking away from me, a realization finally hit me. He wasn't breathing. At no point did his chest inflate, and that wasn't all. As I stood there staring intensely at the people in the market, I began noticing other weird behaviors that they were exhibiting. Other than repeating the same things they did yesterday, every time one of them walked into another, it was like there was no solid matter between them. They just passed through each other. A woman was at one of the fruit stalls, and the man behind the stall was trying to upsell her on his products. Instead of him walking around the stall to show her something, he moved through it. I know it's crazy, but the first thing that came to my mind was ghosts. I took off running. I needed to get home and tell my dad. We had to get out of town. As I was running, I thought I heard Kevin shouting behind me, but I was too scared to turn around. As I ran through the streets, the houses started shifting into something else. The wooden beams became rotten and started to splinter. The windows started to smash one by one as I ran past. I could hear glass being blown outward and shattering as the glass shards hit the floor. The street I was running down became uneven, as the bricks started breaking apart, causing me to trip. A sharp pain shot through my arm. I looked down to see a glistening piece of glass sticking out of my palm. Blood was pouring out of my hand, dripping onto the broken bricks of the street. "Andy, Andy, Andy, what are you doing on the floor?" I shivered. My hair stood on end, and a stomach-turning feeling shot around my whole body. I turned my head to the right, and emerging from the wall was Kevin. If I'm haunted by anything from that town, it's Kevin's inhumanly large smile with stained yellow teeth. I screamed at him, "Leave me alone." I stumbled to my feet and carried on running. I could hear his maniacal laughter behind me, but I kept running. "Dad, we have to get out of this town." I shouted as I burst through the front door. "Dad, where are you?" I frantically ran through the house, but our stuff was gone. The wallpaper was peeling off the walls. There were cobwebs strung across the corners of the rooms. The rancid, nauseating smell of the damp mold on the ceiling was stomach-turning. "Andy, what's wrong?" I heard shouting. I could hear my dad's voice, but it was coming from above me. I felt eyes on me. I could hear my heartbeat increasing rapidly. I looked up, and there was his body halfway out of the ceiling. "Dad, no. What did they do to you?" I screamed up at him. As I felt tears rolling down my cheeks, I collapsed onto the floor. "I don't want to be here anymore." "Don't say that, Andy. Your father wants to be here, and you will stay here with him forever." I looked towards the front door, and Kevin was standing there with a smile from ear to ear. I blinked and my father was standing next to him with the same sadistic smile. the rest of the town started forming from the house walls. It was a sea of people blended and layered on top of each other, each with the same god-awful smile. I refused to let them take me as well. With the last bit of my strength, I sprinted through the back door. As I came tumbling out of the house, something caused me to trip, and when I looked back to see what it was, I saw my dad's body. He had a satellite dish in one hand, and the ladder was still leaning against the wall. He had died in this town, and now he was stuck here. I got back up and ran. I ran for miles. I tripped over tree roots and rocks. I cut myself on more thorns than I could count. I just kept running. Eventually, a couple found me unconscious by the side of the road and brought me to the hospital. When the police came to ask me where my father was, I tried to explain. I even took them to the town, but when we got there, it was gone. It was just more forest, more trees, and no town. I wasn't able to bury my father. I wasn't even able to say goodbye. And since that day, people have been telling me that what I saw was a delusion. I know what I saw was real. I never used to believe in ghosts, but now, I know they exist. I have trouble sleeping at night. And no, I don't have insomnia, or sleep apnea, or any other sleeping disorder. Let's start at the beginning. I graduated from university a year ago with a degree in business administration, and found myself a decent apartment near my first job. The job paid fairly well, and so I was able to afford relatively nice furniture for my apartment. Despite all of my brand new furniture and linens, after the first few weeks in my apartment, I started feeling small, ticklish sensations running up and down my legs in bed. Once I paid a bit more attention to them, I realized that they must have been bed bugs. I was disgusted, and I decided to sleep on my couch and do some research on how to get rid of them in the morning. I read online that the best way to get rid of bed bugs is to clean all of the sheets on your bed, and then scrub and vacuum the mattress and bed frame. When I got home from work, I spent hours going through each of these steps, making sure to do everything thoroughly to get rid of the insects. Thankfully, it seemed to work, as for the next month, I had no insects scuttling along my body at night. However, as I was laying in bed about 5 weeks after I had scoured my bed clean, I felt something run along my hand. Damn these stupid bugs, I muttered to myself as I angrily got out of bed and went off to the couch for the second time. In the morning, I called a pest control company, and they came and fumigated my bedroom. The bugs never stopped coming back. Over the better part of a year, I kept trying different things to get the bugs to leave for good. I called 3 different pest control companies, bought a new bed and linens, and even moved to a different apartment without bringing any of my old furniture with me. But no matter what I did, they always came back with time. As one might imagine, I have had many nightmares involving these bugs. There were nightmares where I would wake up and I would be endlessly covered in bugs from head to toe. They were of all different shapes, sizes, and numbers of little legs. I was never able to move in any of these dreams, and the bugs would always inevitably make their way into my eyes and mouth, with there being nothing I could do about it. There were other dreams where I would be running through the jungle, trying to get away from some unknown creature behind me. I would end up colliding with multiple spider webs, and feel huge tarantulas and other insects working their way up my legs and back as I ran. However, the most prevalent nightmare that I had was more hellish. It would always start with me slowly waking up on a hard stone floor. I would open my eyes and be met with a very large and cavernous space, lit by many small fires scattered across the cavern's rocky outcroppings. Looking down, I saw my body, or what remained of it. My arms and legs were mostly eaten away, with just scraps of skin, tendon, and bone left of them. The rest of my body was heavily decomposed, with my chest torn open in several places. There were bugs crawling all over my ruined body. They ran up and down the bones of my legs and arms, and flowed freely in and out of the gaping wounds in my chest. Terrified, I would attempt to brush them away, and get up and flee. However, my mutilated body always failed me, and after several minutes of struggle, I would resign myself to laying there against the rocky outcropping behind me. I always woke up right after I closed my eyes in defeat, and without fail I would need to brush several bugs off of me when I woke up. However, everything, including these dreams, started to change a few weeks ago. Over the past year, during the periods where I had bug problems, I only ever felt 2 or 3 at a time. One recent night I woke up from one of my bug-induced nightmares and felt dozens of bugs all over my body. I jumped out of bed, attempting to brush them off my skin as quickly as I could. I turned on the light to see how bad the infestation had gotten, and I froze. There wasn't a single bug in sight. Come to think of it, I had never actually seen any of the bugs I'd been dealing with in the past. It hadn't come to my attention before, because they were only ever a couple, and I assumed they had just crawled away once I turned on the lights. But as I stood there that night, there was something about having so many bugs crawling all over me, and then looking to see my bed completely free of vermin, that made me break out in a cold sweat that I had never felt before. Was I going crazy? I couldn't be. I had been feeling bugs in my bed for almost a year, and neither I nor my family have ever had any serious mental problems before. I went off to sleep on the couch that night, but something told me to not make any calls to my extermination companies. It just kept getting worse from there. Every night I went to sleep, I would wake up with hundreds of bugs covering my skin, and every night when I turned on the light, there were no bugs to be seen. The dreams began to escalate as well. When I woke up in that hellish cavern, devoid from any natural light, I would not escape back to the real world so easily. It would often feel like I lay there, suffering in my ravaged and decaying body, for hours, or even days. I was no longer alone in that cavern either. Looking around at the rocky terrain, covered in fire and insects, I saw the remains of several other unfortunate souls, all of which were almost completely eaten away. Each of these bodies had an intact, perfect head. When I had my first incredibly long dream in the cavern, I sat against the rock wall that I woke up against for what must have been 2 days or more. Within that time, I had somehow almost gotten used to the incessant crawling of bugs on and in my body, and I grew restless. I wanted to do something, anything at all, and so I decided that I would try to talk. When I tried to speak at first, I broke out in a coughing fit due to the extreme dryness in my throat. When I finally stopped coughing, I felt a change in the atmosphere in the cavern. The best way I can describe it is like when you let out a sneeze or a cough while sitting in a quiet auditorium. Nobody says anything about it, but you can almost feel their eyes on you, looking to see who disturbed the quiet of the space. Despite this feeling, I decided to call out to one of the bodies that was lying on the ground. "Hey Bonesy over there. Yeah, you. How's it going?" It may sound like a super childish way to talk, but I was sure that I was the only living being in that place, and it felt silly to talk as if I was talking to a real person. All my fake joviality quickly turned to fear as I continued to look at the body. Its head, incredibly slowly, turned to face me. It was in that moment when I realized that these bodies, these things, were still alive. I would have screamed in terror, but I saw the look of true pain that resided behind those large, tear-filled green eyes. This skeleton, this woman, had been down here for God knows how long, and all she could do was lie there in silence as bugs crawled all over what used to be her body. We gazed at each other for what felt like an eternity, and when I awoke in my bed, crying my eyes out and covered in hundreds of bugs that I could not see, I wish with all my heart that I could say that was the end of it, that I had just had a long stride of really bad nightmares and a very strange pest problem, but it wasn't the end of it. I have had the same dream every night, and every night, it feels like my stay in that place gets a few hours longer. I swear when I wake up I am covered in thousands of bugs now, and every time I get out of bed they still vanish completely. I'm starting to deteriorate physically too. I stopped going to work a week ago, and I can barely function, despite the eternity I feel. Lying in that cavern every night, I only ever seem to get an hour or two of sleep, and all I see of my right foot now is a mangled and bloody bone. I know now that I am being drawn into this hell, covered in bugs and the bodies of the damned. Each night now is getting longer by the week, and it is only a matter of time before I join the other lonely, abandoned bodies in the cavern. I have come to grips with the reality that the other mutilated people that I see every night are real people, just like me, eaten away by the bugs, left to rot while still cursed to live, with nothing they can do but cry. So I have one question to ask you before I am lost to the bugs forever. Do you feel them crawling? I received this invitation letter in my mailbox. The letter was in a golden envelope that had a logo of Hotel Rejuvenation on it. Beautifully calligraphed design of the text read, "Dear Mr. Nathan, you are cordially invited to our special celebration at Hotel Rejuvenation. The celebration will include various events, including dinner, a tour around the hotel, and a special evening surprise event. Please make sure to check in at the reception with your invitation by 9 a.m. on June 12th. We look forward to having you as our honored guest. Hotel Rejuvenation." On the back side in small letters it said, "Note: this event has already been paid for and is non-refundable. In case of questions or complaints, feel free to contact us via email." The invitation must have been a mistake though. I never stayed in the hotel before, so I figured they could have confused me with someone with a similar name. So I decided to call the hotel to clear it up. "Hotel Rejuvenation, this is Clara speaking. How can I help you?" A perky female voice resounded on the other end of the phone. "Hi, I received this invitation letter today, but I think there's been a mistake. I think it was sent to the wrong person." "What is your name, sir?" "Nathan Rogers." There was a sound of typing on the keyboard before she continued. "Mr. Nathan Rogers." And then she said my address. "Right?" "Yeah." "You have a reservation for the celebration on June 12th. It's no mistake. The system confirmed that it's already been paid for." "What? No, that can't be right. I've never been in your hotel before, and I sure as hell never paid for any celebrations." "The celebration has been paid for, as a gift to you." "By who?" At this point I had more questions than answers. "I'm afraid I'm unable to disclose that information until the event is over, as per the request of the person who paid, and I'm obliged to inform you that the celebration is non-refundable, in case you fail to show up before 9 a.m. on the reservation day." A long pause ensued. "Sir, are you still there?" "Yes, yeah, thank you." I hung up, baffled. Who paid for this? I had no friends who would do that. Maybe it really was a mistake, or maybe a prank. But who would want to prank me like that? I didn't make any enemies, so this didn't make any sense. After a long time contemplating, I figured it would be a good idea to go there. I might as well treat myself with a mini vacation. Besides, it was non-refundable, and the celebration could be nice. I took a few days off from work and traveled there. Hotel Rejuvenation was located a few hours' drive from my town, nowhere near civilization. It was at a lakeside and surrounded by a forest, which made it ideal for summers if you liked hiking and dipping into water. On the day I arrived, the weather had been particularly bad, and it took me a while to trudge through the mud and get to the parking lot with my car. You'd think a hotel would have a traversable road to it. The hotel itself looked pretty fancy even on the outside, so I was pretty content about scoring this jackpot. Without any farther hesitation, I entered the building. At the reception was a young lady who gave me a big, toothy grin as soon as I walked in. "Welcome to Hotel Rejuvenation. What can I do for you?" She sounded as perky as the person I spoke to over the phone. Her name tag said Sarah though, so this was a different person. "Hi, I'm here for the celebration." I slid the envelope to her. She inspected the letter, the smile never leaving her face, and I half expected her to slide it back to me and say it's a mistake. But when she looked back up at me, she said, "Welcome to the celebration, Mr. Nathan. We'll begin with our tour shortly. Please proceed to the lobby this way." She gestured where I should go. I thanked her and opened a double door, which led me to a big room which served as a waiting room, I suppose. No one else was there. I sat on a big sofa, listening to the sound of falling rain outside. I glanced at my watch. It was 10 minutes to 9. Was I waiting in the wrong room? Before I could even process that thought properly, I heard something in the back of the room. Someone was sobbing. I looked behind my shoulder and saw at the corner of my eye a little boy, no older than 6. I only saw him for a second though, because he rounded the corner and disappeared out of the waiting room. I usually would have just ignored a crying child in a situation like this one. His parents must have been nearby, and he could be crying simply because he just fell or something. But this was different. The crying was like something I had never heard before. It's as if the boy was actually legitimately sad and heartbroken. Like, really heartbroken. "Hey kid." I called out to him, and started to walk to the hallway where he just disappeared. Instead of a response, the crying simply continued. When I reached the hallway, the boy was there. but only for a split second before he disappeared at the staircase again, still sobbing. But in that split second, I saw his dirty hair and ragged clothes. My heart dropped. Couldn't be him. I'm being ridiculous. I followed him to where he disappeared with a stride this time, and stopped in front of the staircase. All I saw was a flight of stairs going up into a darkened corridor that twisted around. I could no longer hear the crying either. "Kid?" I called out again, holding my breath for any noticeable noise. Nothing. Now feeling a little frustrated, I climbed the flight of stairs, and before even reaching the top, I heard something crash on the second floor to the right. "Kid, your parents are gonna be..." I reached the top of the stairs, and stopped dead in my tracks. I was faced with a very different corridor than on the first floor. The entire place was giving off some rusty color, and the walls were dilapidated. Some of the lights weren't working properly, but rather flickering here and there, illuminating the splinted doors. This is definitely a prank, I thought to myself, looking around frantically for any hidden cameras. There were none, and the feeling of dread at the pit of my stomach was only growing by the second. Something was very wrong here. And then I heard another sound, something that sounded like squeaking in the distance. It sounded almost rhythmical, lasting for around 2 seconds and stopping for 2. Despite every fiber of my being screaming for me to get out of there, I followed the sound, ever so slowly, holding my breath and listening. It was just around the corner. Squeak, pause, squeak, pause. Like a rusty door being opened and closed over and over. I peeked around the corner and down the dirty corridor. There were bars right in the middle of the corridor. Behind them sat the kid from before, facing away from me, moving his hand in one motion across the floor over and over, causing that squeaking sound. It didn't take long for me to deduce that the sound was coming from his toy car. I stepped towards the bars, not moving my eyes from the boy's ragged clothes and dirty hair. "Kid?" I called out to him, holding my breath. He didn't acknowledge my presence. Instead, he kept pushing the toy car, causing this unsettling sound over and over, which made my skin crawl with every turn. "Where are your parents?" I called out again, stopping right in front of the bars. Upon closer inspection, I realized the bars were actually a door, but it was locked from the other side with a deadbolt beyond my reach. "Hey, do you hear me?" I was a little frustrated at this point. The kid just kept pushing the toy car. Squeak, silence, squeak, silence. "Josh?" I barely muttered the word, which was preceded by a complete and deafening silence. The boy stopped playing with his toy. The air suddenly became stifling as he stood up and very slowly turned around, revealing a pale face devoid of any emotions, his eyes barely visible from his bangs. "Oh my God," I said to myself, before hearing a loud crashing sound behind me. Faster than lightning, I turned around, only to see someone standing at the end of the corridor. The flickering light made it difficult to tell who was standing there, but the figure was tall and large, legs spread and shoulders tense, standing menacingly. "Hey, what are you doing?" I called out. Instead of responding, he started taking large steps towards me, and when he stopped into the rusty light for a brief second, I could see that this tall man had a surgical mask stained with blood, an apron that resembled what the butchers used, and latex gloves, both equally stained with blood. I backed away upon the bars, with no visible way out. "Josh, the door!" I looked behind me, but Josh only stood there, staring at me with a blank expression. The figure was approaching fast, every step he took bringing me closer to a fate I didn't want to imagine. "Josh, hurry! He's gonna... open the fucking door!" I slammed the door with my palm over and over, the rattling of the bars co-echoing with the heavy thuds of the figure's footsteps. He was only a few steps away from me now. I felt myself falling backwards, realizing that the door was suddenly open. Thinking as quickly as panic allowed me to, I slammed the door shut and locked it with a deadbolt just in time for the butcher to reach out for me through the bars. He almost grabbed me too, but I backed away so fast that I fell on my ass. The man rattled the bars so hard I thought he would rip them right off the wall, but with a few grunts, he just huffed and turned around, walking away as quickly as he came. I stared as his figure disappeared behind the corner, and with him the sound of his heavy boots upon the musty carpets, leaving only my heavy breathing audible. When I turned around, Josh was gone, and I went into a full panic mode again. Josh, where are you? I rounded the corner thinking to myself over and over how I can't lose him again. I frantically screamed his name while running through the long corridor, which seemed to stretch on forever, always with the same light bulb giving off faint light, and doors with the exact same scratching on them. After minutes of running and screaming for Josh, I heard something from a nearby room. I put my ear against the door and heard giggling, like a child playing. Josh, are you in there? I put my eye to the peephole, but was instantly jolted back. Something had fallen into my eye from the peephole, and when I wiped it, my hand came back wet. I blinked, still retaining vision in both my eyes. Just water. When I looked at the door again, water was pouring out of the peephole and down the door at an impossibly quick pace. I screamed Josh and started ramming the door with my shoulder. I couldn't hear giggling anymore, and I have no idea how this was possible. By the time I rammed the door the third time, I was already ankle deep in water. The lights were flicking violently now, and the sound of something going through the flood was heard. Whatever it was heading in my direction. I rammed the door again and again, more violently this time, and just when I thought my shoulder would fall off, the door gave way and I fell face first onto the floor. It took me a moment to collect myself, and realize that all the sounds around me had suddenly stopped. I stood up and observed my surroundings. The hotel room I was in seemed untouched by the water that was coming out of the peephole just now. Except this wasn't the hotel room. This was my house, exactly how it was 5 years ago before I sold it. I looked around in bewilderment. What the hell was going on here? Daddy? I heard a voice behind me, and instantly I recognized it as Josh's. He stood there motionless, no longer in ragged clothes. He had a blue shirt and khakis, exactly how I remembered him the day he went missing. I hugged him tightly and burst into tears. He felt cold to the touch, but I didn't care at that moment. Josh, is it really you? I took his face into my hands. He wasn't just cold, he was ice cold. What happened that day? Why did you never come home? You know what happened, Daddy, he said robotically. I shook my head in bafflement as Josh looked to the right and pointed to an open door in the room. I couldn't see into the room since it was engulfed in complete darkness for a few seconds before the lights flickered to life and revealed our old bathroom. I saw myself in the bathroom, giving a bath to Josh. Past me looked like he hadn't slept in days. I remembered this. When can I play with the other kids? Josh asked. I told you before, Josh, you aren't like the other kids and you never will be, but that's okay. Past me answered. Why is Mommy angry with me? Is it because I'm sick? Mommy's tired, Past me responded. She'll be fine. Josh crooked his head to past me. I'm sorry I'm this way, Daddy, he said to past me with begging eyes. It's as if he felt what was about to happen. It's okay, Josh. Past me responded with a meager smile. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Joshua. I'll always love you. Past me put his hands on Josh's shoulders, stifling a sob. I looked away and shut my eyes tightly. I didn't need to see what happens next, although I remember it well. There was the sound of violent splashing water for a very long time, until it gradually became weaker and eventually stopped completely. With tears running down my cheeks, I willed myself to look back to the bathroom. Past me stood there, looking down at the tub, with Josh's arm limply hanging from the side. The light flickered on and off a couple times, and when they finally stabilized, Past me still stood in the same position. However, this time he had a surgical mask, rubber apron, and latex gloves, all stained with blood. The lights popped out and the bathroom was engulfed in complete darkness again. I was on my knees, sobbing loudly now. Josh's pale and lifeless body was on the carpet in front of me, completely soaked, his black hair covering his eyes. Josh, I'm so sorry. I moved the hair away from his eyes. He looked peaceful, almost as if he was sleeping. After a very long time, I calmed down and stood up. There was a bald, middle-aged man at the door entrance, and I figured from his clothing he was one of the hotel staff. Enjoying your stay, sir? He asked with a toothy grin. I'd like to go now, I said, drained of all energy. Of course, sir. You are free to leave at any moment you like. We just need you to choose a payment method before you check out. Payment method? The services of the event were not included with the event invitation. He grinned again. I knew there was no way I would be able to leave before paying up. I also had a feeling they were not interested in money. I was right. The man reached behind his back and presented a noose. If you prefer the widely popular method. When he saw my reaction, he raised his eyebrows and said, we also have an alternate method of payment, if this one is not your liking. He opened a door to the left and stepped aside. My heart jumped to my throat when I saw a gagged and tied woman on her knees. Her makeup was smeared across her face from crying, and when she saw me, she became hysterical. It was my ex-wife Karen. I looked at the hotel employee who, in addition to the noose, held a kitchen knife in the other hand. The choice here was obvious. I snatched the knife and approached Karen, who became even more hysterical, trying to say something over her gag. I ignored her. I couldn't stand to hear what she wanted to say, whether it be judging or begging. I'm sorry for what I did to Josh, I said. It was for the best and you know it. He was holding us back. He never could have had a normal life. I'm sorry. 10 minutes later, I was back in the hotel lobby. Thank you for choosing Hotel Rejuvenation. The perky hotel receptionist smiled. We hope you enjoyed your stay, and please recommend us to your friends and family. I shot her a glance and walked out without a response. As I entered my car, I glanced at the hotel one last time, only to see figures in shadows staring at me. I drove off. I was questioned by the police a few days later. Apparently my ex-wife Karen had been found dead in an old building outside the town, which served as a hotel before it went out of business. Apparently this was a popular location for people to either commit suicide or murder. I wasn't a suspect, so they thanked me and left. I returned to work and everything was as it was before my vacation. I never told anyone about my trip, and whenever asked by my coworkers, I would simply shrug it off saying it was an ordinary vacation and would avoid going into any details. Hotel Rejuvenation was my punishment, but it also served as a reminder of what horrible thing I did to my son. I still have to live with that for the rest of my life, but aside from the guilt that I feel, one question in particular keeps gnawing at me every night, which puts a primordial fear into me. Who paid for my stay in the hotel?